I'm Nima Rajan. Central and Eastern Canada are the focal point as the 8th day and second full week of the election campaign gets underway. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau began with an announcement in Halifax before heading to St. John's, Newfoundland. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was back at the Ottawa Hotel where he spent the start of his campaign. He is set to make an announcement and hold telephone town halls with Ontario and Manitoba. The NDP's Jagmeet Singh also returned to where he launched his campaign with a climate change announcement in Montreal. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he'll convene a meeting of G7 leaders on Tuesday for urgent talks on the situation in Afghanistan. The UK holds this year's presidency of the Group of 7 nations, which is also made up of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau has been criticized for not moving fast enough to rescue Afghans who supported Canada's military and diplomatic postings in the country. It has been questioned whether his decision to call the federal election has further hindered evacuation efforts. Sunday marked day 7 of the federal election campaign. The opioid epidemic and crisis in Afghanistan dominated the discussion on the campaign trail. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh suggested Liberal leader Justin Trudeau's decision to call the election now may be hindering Canada's ability to arrange evacuation flights. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole announced a Tory government would invest $325 million over the next 3 years to create 1,000 residential drug treatment beds and build 50 recovery centres across the country. Mr. Trudeau spent the day on the East Coast trying to shore up support in a region that the Liberals swept in 2015, but where they experienced setbacks 2 years ago. Meanwhile, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is asking the next government to commit to building new and protect existing affordable rental units in their cities. The Federation President, Joanne van der Hayden, says there is a particular need to expand and protect rental options as the price of housing skyrockets across much of Canada. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh pledged to introduce a bill to change the name of Toronto Danforth in Toronto to Danforth Layton in the former leader's honour. The NDP made huge gains under Jack Layton's leadership, winning 103 seats across the country in the 2011 election. Sunday marked the 10th anniversary of Mr. Layton's death from cancer. Well, there are concerns that the youth turnout rate could drop after Elections Canada decided against offering polling stations on campus. The turnout of those aged 18 to 24 surged to 57% in the 2015 election compared to less than 39% in 2011. But it dropped again in 2019, sinking by 3 percentage points. A spokesperson says the agency has been working with student organizations to inform students of their voting options. However, they noted setting up these stations requires lengthy planning that's not possible during the COVID-19 pandemic. With Canada's 4th pandemic wave in its early stages, more companies are expected to announce this week that they will be instituting vaccine mandates for employees. Last week saw a surge of companies confirm they will be requiring staffers to get the shot, including Sun Life Financial, Shopify, the City of Toronto, the Toronto Transit Commission, and the major banks. Statistics Canada says households paid down a record amount of non-mortgage debt in the first year of the pandemic. This as mortgage debt climbed by even more. The agency says from the onset of the pandemic to January 2021 that non-mortgage debt fell by $20.6 billion, including a $16.6 billion drop in credit card debt. The decrease came as mortgage debt rose by a record $99.6 billion over the same time period. Statistics Canada says households were carrying about $2.5 trillion in outstanding debt 1 year into the pandemic, approximately 2/3 of which was mortgage debt. Hockey leagues, including the NHL, and teams, including the Humboldt Broncos, are offering condolences to the families of 3 junior players killed in a car crash. The National Hockey League tweeted, quote, "The NHL sends its love and deepest condolences to the families of junior hockey players Caleb Reimer, Ronan Sherma, and Parker Magnuson, who tragically passed away in a car accident on Saturday. Investigators are trying to determine the cause of the crash." A First Nation chief says his community will continue to fish for lobster despite interception by the DFO. Sabega-Nagadi Chief Mike Sack says the band will continue to drop traps in St. Mary's Bay, even as DFO officers pull those traps from the water. Mr. Sack announced that the band was expanding its treaty fishery that operates outside of the federally regulated season on Monday, and shortly after the announcement, he was taken in for questioning by DFO officers. DFO spokesperson Noel D'Entremont says since the treaty fishery isn't regulated under the Fisheries Act, the federal agency will continue to seize the traps. All right, stay with us as we take a closer look at where each party stands during the second week of the election campaign. We'll have an interview with Mr. Nik Nanos of Nanos Polling coming up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world coming up on the Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. The federal election campaign is entering its second week. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole returns to the Ottawa Hotel, where he spent the first several days of the campaign. He has virtual telephone town halls with Ontario and Manitoba planned for the evening. Having launched his campaign from Montreal, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is heading back there to try and win back seats from the Liberals and Bloc Québécois. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau remains on the East Coast today, making an announcement in Halifax before heading to St. John's, Newfoundland to meet with locals and supporters. As the campaign continues, the polling numbers continue to change. With us to talk more on the numbers and the campaign issues is Mr. Nik Nanos, who, among other things, is the chief data scientist and founder of Nanos Research. Sir, great having you back on Forum Daily.
It's great to join you and your viewers.
Now, as the second week of the campaign begins, where do you see the major federal parties stacking up in terms of voting intentions?
Well, in the latest Nanos CTV Globe tracking that was just completed last night, we have the Liberals at 32.5%, Conservatives 31.4%, only 1 percentage point back. New Democrats 20.8%, Green Party 5%, Bloc at 6%, and People's Party at 3%. So 4 weeks ago, it looked like a Liberal majority, double-digit lead. Last week, it looked like a Liberal minority, single-digit lead. Now it's statistical dead heat, and the numbers are moving.
And we know Nanos Research also conducts polling on Canadians' preferences for the Prime Minister. So what are some of the shifts that you've been seeing since the start of the campaign?
Well, it's pretty clear that last week was a good week for Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. When we ask Canadians who they'd prefer as Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau is still first at around 32.7%, but O'Toole's at 24%. And to put that into context, Nima, he's up about 6 percentage points, 6 full percentage points in 1 week. Singh is at 19%. We can see Blanchette at about 4% and Bernier at 4% also. So the big movement was for Erin O'Toole. The interesting thing is that he picked up people out of the undecided column. So Canadians who were not sure who they preferred as Prime Minister, a number of those gave a tip of the hat to Erin O'Toole, the Conservative leader, last week based on his performance.
Now, while it's only the start of the second week of campaigning, how are the different party leaders positioning themselves to the electorate right now?
Well, it's pretty clear that for Justin Trudeau, he's positioning himself focused on the vaccination and the pandemic, what he has done for the country and his activities in terms of the vaccination rate, pumping out stimulus, so trying to run on his record. Erin O'Toole, conversely, is running on a plan. He says that he has a plan. He's looking for a vision that he's proposing for the future. And you know, that's how he's positioning himself. And for Jagmeet Singh, what's interesting is that he's positioning himself against the Liberals as better change, smarter change, more progressive change, and trying to tap into Canadians who were thinking or were voting for Liberals in the past to consider another progressive alternative, the New Democrats.
All right, sir, just about 2 minutes left, but turning to some of the issues here, in a recent interview, you mentioned that housing affordability has become a top issue of the campaign. So can you elaborate on that for our viewers?
Well, in a recent poll that we did for Vote Housing, we asked Canadians how worried or not worried they were about paying for their rent or for their mortgage. And interestingly, 15% of Canadians said that they were worried or somewhat worried about just paying for their housing in the next 30 days. Now, put that into context, Nima, that is about 4.9 million Canadians. And this issue cuts across all regions, cuts across all income groups, includes renters and homeowners. It speaks to the hot market that's out there and how affordability is on the radar for many Canadians.
Interesting, sir. So what are some of the other major issues that you're seeing in the campaign trail so far?
Well, the other thing that we do know is that Canadians want to hear about the economy and jobs. They want to hear about the environment and that they're looking for plans for the future. The pandemic, not as much of a boat driver compared to the economy and jobs, the environment, and also even things like the deficit, more important than the pandemic.
All right, sir, just under a minute left, but where and how can our viewers keep up with the latest polling information from Nanos Polling?
So you can go to ctvnews.ca to get the stats. You can go to the Nanos website at www.nanos.ca globemail.co or visit the Globe and Mail site at globemail.com.
All right, Mr. Nanos, thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily, and we hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right, stay tuned. When we come back from the break, we will take a look at the insurance industry and its concerns over climate change. We'll speak with Mr. Robin Edgar, the National Director of Climate Change at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these short messages from our sponsors. The insurance industry is increasingly looking to limit their exposure to the fossil fuel sector, the face of the climate change threat. While insurers provide coverage for many large oil and gas projects, they also have billions invested in fossil fuels through their own portfolios. But climate change is a major concern. Extreme weather events last year cost insurers $2.4 billion in Canada alone. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says the industry is changing quickly. Some global companies will no longer provide coverage for coal or oil sands projects. Other insurers are divesting from fossil fuels or making net zero commitments. European companies are leading the charge, but North American insurers are also facing pressure to limit their exposure to fossil fuels. With us now to discuss more on the subject is Mr. Robin Edgar, the National Director of Climate Change with the Insurance Bureau of Canada. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Insurance Bureau of Canada has said that the industry is changing. So let's talk about that, sir. What are some of the factors that are leading to this change?
So the insurance sector has been ringing the alarm bell about climate change for a long time because the impacts of severe weather have been showing up in their models and hitting their bottom line for decades. There has been a growing understanding of the role that insurers and the broader financial sector can play in terms of pulling forward and smoothing out the transition to a net zero economy. I think Mark Carney played a catalytic role in that regard in terms of identifying the threat of climate change to global financial stability. And since that time, about 6.5, 7 years ago, when he identified that threat as the head of the Bank of England, the insurance sector, the broader financial sector, and central banks around the world have moved very quickly. And in the insurance sector, we've seen more and more companies move toward net zero commitments and plans to meet them.
Now, as you're saying, some global insurers are stopping providing coverage for coal or oil sands projects. What is the current situation in Canada, given our economic makeup?
So, you know, when insurers make net zero commitments and they make plans to meet them and start to execute on those plans, often divestment decisions are the ones that get all the press, but just as important and more common are engagement decisions where as large institutional investors, they'll engage with the companies that they're invested in and work together to drive down emissions. And generally speaking, these divestment and engagement decisions are made on a sector by sector basis, and there'll be different decisions made by different companies. But they're all leading to the same place, which is pulling forward and smoothing out the transition.
And how important is insurance to the natural resource industries in particular?
So, the insurance sector plays an important risk transfer role for the natural resources industry and for all businesses, because generally speaking, individual businesses can't absorb the potential loss impacts that they might be exposed to. So I don't know that it plays a more important role in the natural resources sector than other sectors, but certainly just like you can't drive a car without insurance, you probably shouldn't own a home without insurance. It is a very central role that insurers play when it comes to business.
Now, let's get into extreme weather. We've seen fires across BC. We've even seen tornadoes in Barrie, Ontario. So what are the costs and insurance impacts to these extreme weather events?
So the annual insured losses last year in Canada from severe weather events were $2.4 billion. That's become kind of a normal number. That's become sort of our new number over the last decade. In the 80s and 90s, it was about 6 times less. So obviously, these figures have gone up and up and up. And, we can only imagine where they're headed.
All right, sir, just over a minute left here, but considering all the variables we're discussing here, what is leading to the change in the insurance industry's evaluation of risk, given the increasing global demand for energy?
I think the insurance sector stands alone among sectors in terms of their ability to assess the physical risk of climate change. So like the physical impacts of severe weather on assets or supply chains. It's that assessment of the transition risk and the assessment of the role that the insurance sector can play in terms of smoothing out the transition so that it does not impact, or at least has the least amount of impact on global financial stability as possible. I think that is something that's moved at light speed over the last 6 or 7 years.
All right, Mr. Edgar, great having you today on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, stay tuned. We take a look at what's making news around the world after the break, as the U.S. Vice President says the focus must be on the evacuation efforts in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the U.S. FDA has approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, and New Zealand extends its lockdown. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world coming up next on Forum Daily. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these short messages from our sponsors. Vice President Kamala Harris says the U.S. must stay focused on evacuating citizens and allies from Afghanistan and not be distracted by questions over the chaotic U.S. exit. Ms. Harris made the comment at a news conference in Singapore after meeting with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong to discuss issues ranging from the coronavirus response to cybersecurity. But the news conference was dominated by Afghanistan after the messy U.S. withdrawal sparked concerns about America's commitments to its allies globally. Biden administration officials say the U.S. military is considering creative ways to get Americans and others into the Kabul airport for evacuation from Afghanistan. The Pentagon has ordered 6 U.S. commercial airlines to help move evacuees from temporary sites outside of Afghanistan. President Joe Biden has set an August 31st deadline for ending the evacuation operation. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin tells ABC's This Week that he'll soon make a recommendation on whether to extend that deadline. It's news that could convince more Americans to roll up their sleeves and get vaccinated as COVID-19 case counts soar. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has given full approval to the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. It is saying people can be very confident that the drug meets its high standards for safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality. The FDA says after hundreds of millions of shots, serious side effects remain exceedingly rare, while the vaccine remained 97% protective against severe COVID-19. New Zealand's government says it is extending a strict nationwide lockdown until at least Friday as it tries to extinguish a growing coronavirus outbreak. The news came as health authorities reported 35 new local infections of the fast-spreading Delta variant. This is the highest number of COVID-19 cases in New Zealand since April last year. Meanwhile, in neighboring Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says lockdowns are not a sustainable way to live. He says states must open their borders once vaccination rates reach 80% of the population aged 16 and older. People protested in the streets of Dutch cities on Saturday, calling for an end to the government's ban on large musical festivals. Thousands of people attended one of the Unmute Us marches in Amsterdam. The Dutch government has banned large-scale events such as musical festivals until at least September 19th, amid fears over the spread of the COVID-19 Delta variant. China will now allow couples to have a third child. The legislature on Friday amended the population and family planning law. This is seen as part of a decades-long effort by the ruling Communist Party to dictate the size of families in keeping with political directives. Beginning in the 1980s, China strictly limited most couples to one child, which is a policy enforced with threats of fines or loss of jobs. This led to abuses, including forced abortions. The rules were eased in 2015 to allow 2 children as officials acknowledge the consequences of the plummeting birth rate. International aid groups are warning that millions of people in Syria and Iraq are losing access to water, electricity, and food. The groups say the two Arab countries are suffering a rise in temperatures, low rainfall, and drought, depriving many of drinking water. The drought is also affecting electricity supplies as low water levels are impacting dams. More than 5 million people in Syria directly depend on the Euphrates River, while in Iraq, the loss of access to water from the Euphrates and Tigris River and drought threaten at least 7 million people. Qatar has announced October 2nd as its date for the country's first election to vote for members of its top advisory panel known as the Shura Council. The date was announced Sunday by royal decree. The Shura Council election aims to give the country's citizens more say on how their hereditary emirate is governed. The election allows Qataris to choose 30 members of the country's 45-seat Shura Council, which are now all picked by Qatar's ruling elite. The council has no substantive legislative power, but advises the emir on policies. Nigerian officials have confirmed the release of 15 more students who were abducted from their school in northern Nigeria last month. A government official in Kaduna State told the Associated Press on Sunday that 15 students were set free on Saturday evening. Authorities believe the gunmen are still holding 65 others who were taken from the Bethel Baptist High School in the town of Damishi. The kidnappers had previously released a group of 28 hostages and before that, 34 others. And Chinese officials say the country's Mars rover is soldiering on after completing its initial program to explore the red planet. The interplanetary vehicle completed its 90-day program on August 15th, which was the search for frozen water and clues as to whether Mars once supported life. After the United States, China is the second country to land and operate a spacecraft on Mars, where days are 40 minutes longer than on Earth. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.